Hi there! In this video we'll look at which partner works best for Sereniel, or more specifically, whether her 5-star signature partner, Peko, is worth the investment over alternative options you may already own. I'll present damage comparisons across the relevant partners under different assumptions, namely whether conditional buffs and ego skills are active or not. Since there are quite a few variables involved in a fair comparison, I'll first briefly explain my partner selection and the methodology behind the damage calculations. If you're only interested in the takeaway, I can tell you upfront that Peko does come out ahead, though the size of the gap depends on the scenario. Stick around if you want to understand how large that difference is, and more importantly, why. Speaking of making smart investment decisions, if your gacha funds are running low and you're looking to save a few bucks, I recommend using Lootbar, an affordable and secure recharge platform. Through their site, you can purchase any in-game pack at a discount, with limited time offers reducing prices up to 30%. For example, a 6,480 crystal pack that normally costs $100 in-game is available for around $70 on Lootbar. Once you've made your selection, you can choose your preferred top-up method. Lootbar conveniently offers a self-top-up option that launches a single-use cloud instance, meaning you don't have to share your login information directly. You simply log in as usual, select your server, and purchase the same item you chose on Lootbar from the in-game shop. After clicking buy, Lootbar handles the payment process, which usually only takes a few seconds. Once the purchase is complete, the items are delivered normally, and you can safely log out and clear your data. Overall, the process is quick, secure, and includes a refund guarantee in case of technical issues. If you're hesitant about using a third-party top-up service, feel free to check Lootbar's reviews on Trustpilot. They currently hold an impressive 4.9 rating across more than 30k reviews. If you don't want to miss out, use my link in the description or pinned comment to sign up and receive an additional 10% coupon for new users. With the financial side addressed, let's return to the analysis. Among the existing hunter options, the 3-star Yuri will be the baseline for the comparison. Fully duped, she provides an unconditional 16% attack bonus that is quite valuable. Then, once per battle, as the first shuffle occurs, she grants a multiplicative 16% damage bonus to all cards. Her calculations will reflect both of these situations, meaning with and without the one-time shuffle bonus. Between the two 4-stars, Carroty is a better choice for Sereniel. She offers 10 up to 20% bonus damage when Sereniel generates a laser for the first time per turn. A more ideal setting presumes that all of Sereniel's cards benefit from this bonus, while a less favorable scenario assumes that the laser generation only occurs via Shining Core after breaking a target. The other part of her passive grants a damage bonus for the first card used in a turn, which is rather irrelevant. Her ego skill can be used for another 20% damage bonus for all of Sereniel's created lasers. This is effective once per battle and will be another situation to analyze. Arkad, on the other hand, is intended for bullet users. His ego skill works for all cards, but none of his passive does, so he is excluded from the analysis. The standard 5-star partners are also excluded as they don't synergize with Sereniel either. Kiara is designed for Renoa and grants bonuses when a card is discarded or when the graveyard is filled up. Most if not all of her passive is difficult to activate for Sereniel. Janet is geared towards bullet users. Her crit bonus works for Sereniel, but the Battle Pass partner has the same bonus with a more generic passive effect. That said, Serithea grants an unconditional 8% critical chance bonus plus a stacking crit damage buff, up to 15% at E0. For simplicity, I will include her in the calculations when her buff is stacked up. Peko is Sereniel's signature partner, providing 8% attack at E0 up to 16% at E4. She also grants up to 30% additive bonus damage when Sereniel's lasers are moved from the graveyard to hand, which occurs upon breaking a target. She provides another 15% bonus damage against ravaged targets, for a total additive bonus of 45%. Since the buff is permanent, we will have to distinguish in the analysis between the first turn, when the buff is being stacked, versus subsequent turns, where it is already active. Her ego skill confers another permanent buff that activates upon breaking a target. Then, Sereniel gains for that turn a 25% crit chance bonus. With that, the contestants are introduced. For the damage calculations, I am referencing the stats of my Sereniel with equipment and max potentials. She has roughly 800 attack, 55% crit rate, and 190% crit damage. Note that the bonuses from the save data gear and partner are only applied when entering a stage. So in this test her final attack value is above 1000 due to the 18% bonus from Intellect of Discord. I'm ignoring the 4-piece bonus of the Judgment's Flame set for simplicity, but the 25% crit damage is obviously included as a raw stat bonus. The target for the testing and calculations is a level 50 family head Nebula Distortion boss whose defense parameter is known. This opponent has 7 tenacity bars, which mostly affects the calculations for Peko. Her bonuses become active only after breaking the target, which is worth keeping in mind. When disregarding her allies, we can estimate the number of hits Sereniel requires to break the boss's tenacity. Without weakness application, each laser except the first one shreds 1 bar due to afterglow. The trickiest part about doing any calculations in CCN is the choice of a build and rotation to test. For these calculations, I'm assuming a deck that includes the upgrade variant of Shining Core that creates 2 lasers upon use and whenever the opponent is ravaged. Then a total of 3 copies of Homing Laser that move to hand at the start of turn. Plasma Missile has the epiphany that applies instinct weakness to the boss and grants 60% bonus damage to all lasers. Due to the weakness damage, each laser shreds about 2 tenacity bars after the first one. In this example, there aren't enough EP to use Peko before breaking the boss, but this varies between fights. Pale Shooting Star breaks the boss, followed by more lasers afterwards. I'm assuming Sereniel is E0 here. For Peko's calculations, her stacking damage buff is maxed out after Pale Shooting Star, and the damage bonus against ravaged opponents applies. When Pale Shooting Star isn't the ability to break but rather the activated lasers, more lasers will return from the graveyard afterwards. We will look at 2 scenarios. First is a shorter rotation that essentially stops shortly after the first break. The opening hand includes the 3 regular lasers that move to hand, plus 2 lesser lasers from Shining Core, Plasma Missile to apply weakness and Pale Shooting Star to break. Then 3 lasers are activated, the 2 other lasers move back to hand and 2 more lasers are created from Shining Core. For a less conservative scenario, I'll include a second case that continues from here, mostly relevant for longer boss fights like the Great Rift. Then, I'm assuming another use of 3 regular lasers and 3 lesser lasers, plus Cobalt Light with a total of 4 hits for good measure. This still keeps it simple, but should highlight whether there are any noteworthy differences when more cards are used. With that preamble out of the way, let us go over the results. First, we'll look at various scenarios using the shorter rotation before narrowing in on more generalizable findings using the longer rotation. Yuri's damage without the 16% one-time bonus serves as the baseline for the comparison. Her damage is shown in blue. When adding the once per battle 16% damage bonus after the first shuffle, we see an increase in total damage of 10%. This makes the most generous assumption that all of Sereniel's attacks were affected by the buff, meaning the shuffle occurred prior to any of her cards. This is an ideal setting and serves to illustrate Yuri's potential peak performance. Carroty's damage is shown in orange. We're assuming she is E4 in this calculation, which amounts to a multiplicative 20% damage bonus when a laser is generated. The least favorable common scenario assumes that this occurs after the first opponent gets ravaged. In that case, and without her ego skill, the total damage output is 96% of Yuri's default damage. On the contrary, if Carroty's buff is active from the start of the turn, the output is 102% relative to Yuri. This instant activation is guaranteed on the first turn of battle when using the upgrade variant of Shining Core, but in later turns unlikely, unless you're running a skill version of Shining Core instead. The most favorable scenario combines the 20% bonus from the ego skill and the 20% at the start of the turn. This 40% multiplicative damage boost yields a 12% increase over Yuri's baseline performance. Of course, you can't rely on a one-time ego skill to determine a partner's value, so this again just demonstrates her ideal scenario. When taking the most generalizable setting for the 2 partners, Yuri comes out ahead slightly. Next, Serithea has very generic crit buffs. Since there's randomness involved in the ramp up of her crit damage buff, I'm only considering the scenario in which she is fully stacked for a 15% crit damage bonus to all attacks. Even then, her performance is fairly close to Yuri, with only a 2% improvement over the 3-star partner. If you bought the Battle Pass, I hope you didn't pick her specifically for Sereniel. Lastly, let's have a look at Peko's performance. First, her turn 1 output is the least favorable, as all of her buffs activate after the first ravage. Then, when 3 lasers are sent from the graveyard to the hand, 30% additive bonus damage are gained, plus another 15% when attacking a ravaged opponent. This scenario doesn't include the activation of her ego skill, so her crit chance is unchanged. Even in this restrictive setup, she outperforms Yuri by 8%. When adding the activation of the ego skill into the mix, meaning she now gains overclock for 25% bonus crit chance upon ravage, her total output is 18% higher than Yuri's baseline. Whether you manage to activate Peko's ego skill on the first or second turn, the next scenario assumes that Peko is fully stacked. This means 30% bonus damage from the start of the turn, plus the 15% damage and 25% crit chance when the break occurs. Then, Peko outperforms the competition significantly, granting a total increase in damage of 26% over the 3-star alternative. Next, let us look at the comparison of the longer rotation. Now I'm only considering selected scenarios for each partner. Yuri is again the baseline without the one-time shuffle damage bonus. Carroty's performance is calculated when the card generation bonus is applied from the start of turn, but without her ego skill. Then, at E0 she is weaker than Yuri and slightly stronger at E4. Depending on the version of Shining Core your deck includes, this may still be a somewhat favorable comparison for Carroty, as her performance looks worse when her bonus only activates after the first break. The longer rotation did not change anything about the relative difference between Serithea and Yuri. For completeness, I'm also including her output when fully duped, though this is currently not possible. At E4, she will improve upon Yuri's damage by 11%. I guess it's safe to say she's not worth your money. Finally, Peko's output is calculated for the most common scenario, with her ego skill active and her damage buff stacked up. At E0, she outperforms Yuri by 31%. At E4, she increases her output by another 32%, for a total damage increase of 163% relative to Yuri's baseline. The developers promised to make higher rarity partners more relevant, and they certainly delivered. While the 3-star partner is quite serviceable, my suggestion would be to go for one copy of Peko before Sereniel dupes. Keep in mind that you can obtain Peko from the shop during this patch, so there's no need to gacha for her unless you want to get her duped up. Getting 4 more copies of Peko only gets you as much of an increase as the first one though. Such diminishing returns should deter anyone but big spenders. With that said, I'd love to hear whether you found this helpful, if my explanations were clear, or if you have ideas for future videos like this. In any case, thank you so much for watching. See you next time.